Greetings. This is San Francisco 1999, and I'm Neil Cavan. I'm an artist and a performer, and I was there on the San Francisco Bay Area scene during the last days before smartphones and social media. And I host conversations here with guests who recollect what life was like back in the before times. The folks who are sharing their stories each week in conversation were then, and still are, vibrant contributors and participants in the co-creation of San Francisco Bay Area arts and culture. The majority of the esteemed guests are folks that I know from that time and or had the pleasure of working with back then, perhaps are still my colleagues now, many of whom I have the honor of considering my good friends to this very day. You can join the conversation by leaving a question or a comment at sanfran99.com. Hello, 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 hello. Thank you for being here. This is episode 4, and today we're going to talk with Vinnie Esparza, part of some of San Francisco's longest running DJ nights, and he is both past and present, someone who might help you find your next favorite record in record stores in San Francisco. He was also on one of SF's best radio stations, and also was good friends with one of my good friends who passed this year, Randall Kress, aka Soul Salam. So in some ways this episode, and in many ways this whole podcast, is dedicated to Mr. Kress, Mr. Soul Salam. So when you hear his name, that's who we're talking about. Today we are joined by Vinnie Esparza. Vinnie, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Real good. I'm really excited to talk to you. Curious for you, when you look back at moving from Oakland to San Francisco, did you say you went to college somewhere around in the Bay too?
Yeah, I actually moved from Santa Cruz to San Francisco. I was born and raised in Oakland. You know, I went to UC Santa Cruz from 90 to 94.
What were you studying in Santa Cruz?
Well, I was studying psychology, but really what I was studying was being on the radio. I was a music director at KZSC.
Oh.
Yes, you know, the radio station down there for 3 years. And I mean, I had a couple of radio shows, and that was actually one of the best things I could have done, was be on the radio, because back then, you know, I was all about punk and hard rock and metal and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is that they said, you know, if I wanted to have that type of show, that I had to do a soul, jazz, and blues show in the morning, because they needed someone to like fill in that slot. And that was actually the best thing that they could have done for me, because that really broadened my knowledge of those musics, and by default that helped to sort of set the foundation for what I would be DJing in the city 4 or 5 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always had an appreciation for jazz and soul and things like that, but it's always sort of been in kind of the background when I was in like junior high and high school, because I was just obsessed with like, you know, punk and metal and that kind of stuff. Funny, I was a total hesher. Still sort of am, and in fact, I still have an appreciation for that. But that was actually like such a blessing for me to do a jazz, soul, and blues show, because it really opened up the door for everything that I'm even still doing today, you know?
That's very cool. How are you finding your music? You had an appreciation for it.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, back then there was not really internet. I mean, there was, but it wasn't, you know?
Yeah.
So really what I was doing was getting my knowledge from a couple of different sources. One is fellow DJs that were on the air that were kind of doing things that I was enjoying, and I was friendly with a lot of them, and some of them are, you know, I was really tight with. And so I would just ask them, hey, what is that you were playing? What's this and that? Can you make me some sort of mixtapes? And there's one dude that did basically the funk show. His name was Sloppy J. I asked him if he can make me some mixtapes, you know, and he was like, oh yeah, totally. So he made me these like outstanding mixtapes of all the stuff that, you know, is kind of essential 101 stuff, but was for me back then was completely new and unknown. Stuff like Simande, you know, James Brown, you know, Roy Ayers, like that sort of stuff that if you have zero knowledge of that, when you get turned on to to those artists.
Yeah.
Even though those are artists that, I know forwards and backwards now, back then it was a revelation for
Yeah.
me, to be able to have to have those mixtapes.
Word.
So on top of talking to fellow DJs, I would also just go through the stacks. They had an amazing library of music there, like tons of vinyl, tons of CDs, where I would basically just spend entire afternoon and evenings just going through stuff and playing stuff that sounded interesting to me, not over the air, but like just auditioning it in the little production studios or whatever, just basically spending time with the music and then trying to get an idea of what I liked and didn't like.
Yeah.
So after I graduated, I moved to Oakland for a second, and then I happened to end up in San Francisco because a good friend of mine told me that, hey, I'm looking for a roommate. And he lived in a sweet place too, man, with reasonable rent.
Nice.
So I was like, all right, cool. So I moved over there, and
When would that have been? Like,
that was probably like probably like early 95 is my guess. Late 94, early 95, shortly after I graduated.
okay, yeah.
But, everything that I did as far as work was still music related. Like I worked for Polygram Distribution. I worked at Gavin at the Gavin Report. I worked at Ubiquity Records. So I did I was pretty much still in the music industry, and I also was doing a show on KUSF. On top of that, so I was doing.
Yeah. What was your show on KUSF?
It was called Spanish Grease, and it was a show that focused mostly on like Latin stuff, salsa and things along those lines. But it followed a show that Andrew Jervis did that was a long time show called the Friday Night Session.
Right.
It was great because I would get a lot of the carryover crowd from that show because they sort of had an appreciation for Latin beats and things like that. So that's the show that I did. And it was prime time too. It was Friday night from like 9 to midnight or something. It was great. And then that's when I also started DJing out in the clubs, and bars and things like that. So everything kind of happened at once,
Right. Andrew Jervis, I forgot about that guy.
He was a guy that was really pushing very forward-thinking music. Because remember, like, he was one of the DJs that was also spinning at Nicky's, along with the Ubiquity crew, Michael McFadden, Jody McFadden. And those guys were the ones that were, like, really brought what was happening, the rare groove thing and, like, the acid jazz thing. And those people were directly, responsible for bringing that to the Bay Area. I mean, they saw what was going on in the UK and in Europe, and basically like just brought that here, not only by doing their nights, but by starting their label Love and Hate, that with that out of the Groove Merchant, that eventually became Ubiquity.
So wait a minute. So that label came out of Groove Merchant Records?
Yeah.
Really?
Ubiquity started as Love and Hate Records, which was a little imprint that was run out of Groove Merchant at the old location, which is a block away from where it is now. So they had Love and Hate happening, and they were reissuing a lot of like the jazz funk and things like that. A lot of the really tough to find records and records that were kind of, in demand. Then they started putting out newer music on Ubiquity.
Like what would be an example of some of the Bay Area acts that were on Ubiquity?
Grey Boy was on there. He wasn't necessarily Bay Area, he was San Diego, but that was the biggest.
Right.
That was the biggest new artist on Ubiquity for a hot minute. That first Grey Boy record, which was pretty kind of groundbreaking when it came out, and it's a killer album actually. That first record featured all of those musicians, like Carl Denson on sax and like Robert Walter on the keys, and all the guys that basically went on to be a band, in their own right, the Grey Boy All-Stars were those guys. And that's why they named themselves that, because that record was so popular at the time that they wanted to let people know, hey, we're the guys that play on this record. So that was on Ubiquity. And then there was I know that Andrew Jervis had a thing called Better Days on Ubiquity.
What was that?
It was kind of like, kind of a broken beat, future jazz sort of thing,
Cool.
In fact, a lot of the things that they did were kind of leaning in that direction, because Andrew Jervis was doing A&R for Ubiquity. So a lot of the stuff that he was putting out was very forward-thinking, broken beat sort of stuff, like Alex Atias and Pata and things along those lines that were very like...
This would have been like early 2000s,
yeah,
right?
At this point, this was early 2000s, yeah. The reason that era was so awesome is because people were very much open-minded, especially people that went out to clubs. You were open to different styles of music,
Yeah.
even though, it was like very forward-thinking, but they also embraced a lot of music from the past, like a lot of Latin and reggae and Brazilian and things along those lines.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why it was cool to work at Ubiquity, is because they were all about that. They were all about like, okay, so the new forward thinking stuff was on Ubiquity label proper, but they would also reissue like rare, Latin and Brazilian and funk and this and that on the Love and Hate subsidiary label. And that's kind of encapsulates what San Francisco was all about at that time. Is, a lot of the nights that I was doing were super diverse. Like,
What's one of the first nights that you remember doing regularly?
it was called Soul Samba, and it was at Dalva. It was a mixture of like, everything that we love: soul, jazz, Latin, new electronic stuff, down tempo, whatever. In fact, one of the parties that we threw at Ubiquity was called No Categories, which was also a series of compilations that they did as well. And it was just that. It was like all different types of music, new and old, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's why it was so dope to be DJing back then. In my bag of records that I would bring out, it would be like 10 different genres of music that you can play in one night. And you could go from Latin to hip hop to soul to like house to whatever. And, the crowd, I mean, if you knew what you were doing, the crowd would go along with you.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you could do that nowadays.
Yep.
Nowadays, it's very like, it's a soul night, or it's a house night, or it's a reggae night.
Right.
There's no real nights where you can just play
right.
that sort of stuff and people don't get confused.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Especially for a dance party.
Especially for a dance party. Maybe you can get away with that at a lounge setting, but
Right.
dance party nowadays, I mean, that's just kind of unheard of, You can't really get away with that anymore. But back then you could,
Were you doing all vinyl back then?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm still doing all vinyl for the most
Right,
part,
right. You were always a champion of the 45s too, 7 inches.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, but honestly, like the only reason I even played 45s was because I'm just lazy, and because I could carry more records. You know what I mean? They were not as heavy, but I mean, I love playing 12 inches and LPs and things like that. But nowadays, when I go spin out, it's usually 45s that I bring.
Yeah. What would you say is your one, other than Dub Mission, like some of your longer running nights that you've done in San Francisco?
Well, I did a night called Hella Tight for a really long time. And I did that with my boys, Asti Spumante and Johnny Deeper, who were like, total characters. But that was a really, really fun night. And that moved around. That went from Amnesia to Milk to Nicky's and then back to Amnesia. But I did that night forever, man. Like, well, it feels like forever. It was at least eight to 10 years of just doing that night like every month,
You were doing the radio show at the same time, yeah?
For a while, yeah. And then I stopped doing KUSF, and I don't exactly remember why. And then, sure, at some point KUSF shut down, which was super sad.
Yeah. You were always a part of Dub Mission, right?
For the most part, I mean, I was a resident DJ 21 of the 22 years it was active. So yeah, I would say for the most part, I was there like for the whole run, except for maybe the first year.
I'm gonna talk to Sep. Did she start that, or did you guys all start it together?
No, she started that. That's Dub Mission was her thing from the get.
Did you know her before Dub Mission?
Oh, yeah. When I was the music director at KZSC, she was doing radio promotions. Like, she was basically an independent promoter. Like, so bands would hire her to push their stuff to radio. So I would get calls from Sep talking about like, oh, have you checked out this CD and blah, 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 and this and that. So I knew her like long before she started Dub Mission,
Yeah. When did you meet Randall and like what happened?
Well, the thing about Randall, aka Soul Salam, is that, he was basically like in the scene when I was in the scene. We were kind of doing the same sort of thing. I mean, I think he was maybe hustling more records. Like, I think he was like selling records and things like that as well.
I knew he was a record collector and he had amazing taste in music, but I was like, okay, you're a DJ now?
Yeah, no, everyone was a DJ. The joke back then was you could just throw a rock in a room and hit a DJ. Like, there was so many of us. But, inevitably, because we were like kind of rolling in the same sort of clubs and talking to the same people, we eventually met. And that was probably super early too. That was probably like 95 or something. Him and I, we would like DJ, like either be a guest at his night or he'd be a guest at my night. And then eventually we did a night together at the Hush Hush
Yeah.
in the early 2000s. It was called Nova Concepção, which is New Conception in,
Yeah.
Brazilian Portuguese.
Was that the one on
It was on 14th and Guerrero.
Yes. Dude, I worked
Yes.
the door for you guys for
Oh,
some of
yes,
those.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
So
Concepção. Yes,
That's
that
right,
was
man.
that was a cool party right there.
That was a fun party, man. And the thing about it is like, it was always interesting playing with dude because he'd always bring percussion down and pretty much like it was guaranteed if I was DJing, he was on the drums, like playing along. And most of the time it was cool, but sometimes it was like, dude, you're louder than the music. Like,
Right.
just tone it down.
Djembe.
But anyways,
Djembe is not an indoor drum.
no, it's not. And it's loud, man. So loud. But the thing about him is when he played out, like he definitely had, even though he certainly had an appreciation for like a lot of the older stuff and things like that, he was very forward thinking. Like
That's
he
right.
was very like into whatever is new and coming out. Like he was like immediately one of the guys that embraced drum and bass,
Yeah.
broken beat. Like I think he even had a broken beat night at the Hush Hush with someone else, with Jacobo, I think. And so, he was very much that dude that was like very forward thinking, very into whatever was new and coming out and interesting to him. Whereas I was exact opposite. I was more, into like sort of the older stuff, but also had an appreciation
Yeah.
for some of the newer stuff and would sprinkle it in, blah, blah, blah. So we were like kind of exact opposites in terms of like the styles that we played, even though we both played the same sort of stuff. Our focuses were a little different.
It makes
He
for
was
a
more
good night, though, right?
Yeah, no, it made for a great night because
Yeah.
we really balanced each other out, and that's what was so dope about Nova Concepção is that it was literally new and old. I mean, but
Yeah.
it was honestly, it's always been like even at Dub Mission, like I was always a guy that was playing like the roots and dub, and Sep was very much drum and bass and forward
Right.
thinking and blah blah blah. So I was always a dinosaur playing like the old shit, even when I was young. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
San Francisco has always had its great eras, right? Like at one point, it was like jazz and beatnik central, right? And then it became like the hippie haven for like Summer Love and pre-Summer Love and all that. It was like the hippie spot, right? In the early 70s, it was like just a mess. But like later on, like it became in the late 70s and early 80s, it became like a punk place. And then it became also like a space for like a lot of like the underground gay discos and things like that and blah, blah, blah. And I feel like between 95 and 2005 was the last great era of San Francisco. Basically, like after that, the techies came in and just they kind of ruined shit, to be honest.
Yeah. That seems to be the consensus. And I hear San Francisco's coming back.
It still has a lot of cool stuff happening, for sure. Like there's still like a lot of cool nights and a lot of interesting stores and blah blah blah. But there was a certain energy in the air back then, man. Like it's hard to explain. It's like when you go to New York and you feel like the energy around you. That's kind of like the way it was in San Francisco. Like there was so much dope shit popping off so often that music and art and film and food and everything was all coming together at one time in a very unique sort of special way, and that was so dope, man. I mean, like there was always something going on, even on a Monday night you could go down and catch.
That's right.
You can catch like a really dope show or whatever,
Yeah, I remember that thing that was called the red light. It was like at the up and
Yeah,
down.
man, dude, I would go see Charlie Hunter for $3 at the Elbow Room every Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like, so there was like, that was the last great era I feel of like artistic expression and explosion in San Francisco. And after that, it stalled out. It just kind of like petered out, and now it's coming back in its own little way, and that's cool. But I was really lucky and so glad to have been able to like have lived through that and have been a part of that. And again, you don't even realize how special it is. You just take it for granted, like how special. At least I did. Take it for granted. You're just like, oh, it's just around. Like Alphabet Soup is playing down at Du Nord. It's just happening. It's just around, until it's not. And then you realize, oh, shit, like we lost, a really special time. the reason San Francisco was able to go off back then is because it was still relatively affordable. Like
That's
know,
right.
you could
That's right.
you could rent, you can have a space out in like, the dog patch, area that was
Yeah.
like, that was not super expensive. Now, what happened was like
Yeah.
once money came into the city, like it drove all the artists out. I mean, that's like, we all know that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, the Mission used to actually be affordable. That
yeah,
was like the affordable, cool place
it
to live.
was. And now
Yeah.
you can't, nowadays it's just impossible, man. It's just too damn expensive, So I
Yeah.
think, it was
Right.
all the right combination back then, like all the right people in the right space at the right time with like reasonable rent, That's why we were able to make it happen.
Vinnie Esparza, thank you so much for your stories, your time, your positive reflections about the era, and thank you for continuing to do the very dope things that you're doing out there in the world. Congratulations on the new bakery with your wife.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And what's it called?
Honey and Pearl is what it's called.
Honey and Pearl.
Yes, we are located in Emmeryville for all of your cake needs.
The link will be in the description. Anything you want to say about Honey and Pearl?
Well, just that my wife and partner is an amazing pastry chef and is probably one of the dopest pastry chefs in the country. So you should check it out.
Yeah, check it out. They make amazing things. So you can look on their Instagram or on the website. All right. Well, take care, Vinnie, and I'll hope to see you soon.
All right, Neil. Take it easy, man. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to San Francisco 1999. We'll be back next Friday with another episode for you. Subscribe to this podcast so that you get notified. And if you'd like to join the conversation, you can go to sanfran99.com, leave a question, comment, sign up for the newsletter. And hey, before you go, remember this. You are making history. You are part of history. You are part of culture. And so my hopes and my wishes for you are that you find ways to express yourself creatively and engage in the communities and the cultures that you are passionate about and be a part of making something happen. Until next time, take care and much love.